Welcome back, WNST. I don't like it. You don't like it. Luke Jones doesn't like it. We were all sort of stuck together and all in it together on the Saturday night down there with the Buffalo Bills. And, Luke, worst nightmares, dude. Edelman goes down this weekend. Tyrod Taylor, when we had Justin Tucker getting hit in the head. Whew. Thank God we're getting to the end of this, and I know the Ravens have been very, very quick to say Flacco's going to be able to play in Cincinnati. I don't necessarily think it's a bad idea that he's not around for this. Maybe I'd like to see him at practice, but where we are right now, let's get some real football going, man.
Yeah, I hear you on that. We always talk about that balance, and coaches are always trying to find that balance. Guys need to play. Guys need to practice. I think if it weren't important at all, then you wouldn't see any of these guys play in the preseason. And but at the same time, especially with this current CBA where they changed a lot of the parameters for the off-season workout program and training camp and no more two-a-days, we've also made comment in recent years of the quality of play maybe not being up to par in the first 2, 3, 4 weeks of the season. So there's a middle ground there. I think certainly you see what happened with Julian Edelman and a few other notable players going down with either season-ending or long-term injuries over the weekend. And, you do kind of exhale. The Ravens certainly had their fair share of season-ending and long-term injuries even before training camp started. But, knock on wood, the last couple of weeks, it's been a little quieter in that regard. Now, they're certainly waiting for guys to come back, and John Harbaugh didn't even want to entertain the question of if Joe Flacco would practice this week for whatever reason. But certainly you see what happened with the third preseason game, that dress rehearsal, so to speak, for the regular season. And you count your blessings that it appears that the Ravens got through their third preseason game without any catastrophic injuries. But, of course, we'll find out the next few days as they get back on the practice field.
All right, any observations that you want to take out of this other than, defense is going to be okay, I think, right? I saw Cincinnati play a little bit of fake football over the weekend, saw their first team running around down there with the Redskins on Sunday afternoon, sort of channel flipping as, you're want to do at this point when the Orioles game's over and they're getting the brooms out up at Fenway. And, I think the defense will be formidable this year. I think that, some of the struggles we've seen in the past, I'd like to think that some of those things, like the ball going over the head, are a thing of the past. By the way, I love the way Suggs played on Saturday. Talk about veterans playing and why and what it means. Well, as long as he doesn't get hurt, I like the tempo, I like the pace, I like the hunger, I liked everything about it.
Yeah, I honestly think, and you know how I thought about this offseason, but that said, as far as my opinion of needing to do more to the offense that they didn't do, and then they had some injuries that kind of compounded or put that problem into focus, but this is as optimistic as I've felt about a Ravens defense since Ray Lewis and Ed Reed were in town. It really has been a dominant performance in the preseason, and really from the starters down to the second and third teamers. The reality is Ozzie Newsome's going to have to let go of a couple, 2 or 3 either young or guys that are in their second, third year, guys who've been around a little while and maybe will be the victim of a numbers game. I feel like they're going to let go of at least 2 or 3 defensive players that they easily would have held on to in past years, and it's just that their depth is that good. So I think this defense has a chance to be great. I think you need to be very careful with how you view preseason performance and then what it translates to when the lights go on for real. A different speed of the game for regular season compared to preseason. You always hear people talk about that. But that said, the numbers speak for themselves, and this team from their starters down to the second and third team they've been exceptional. So I really like what I've seen from the defense. I think it has a chance to be a special kind of group. Like I said, don't think I've been as high on a Ravens defense since Ray Lewis and Ed Reed were still running around on the defensive side of the football for the Ravens. Now, that said, I don't know if I've been more concerned about an offense in a long, long time than I am looking at this Ravens offense, and it's not all about Joe Flacco missing the preseason. I don't really love what I've seen from the offensive line. The running game has not been good. I haven't been overly impressed with the running back.
Yeah, that's not going to change with Flacco under center, right?
Sure. I haven't really loved what I've seen from the wide receivers, although I assume Mike Wallace will be fine. I assume Jeremy Maclin will be fine. But all the chatter about the young wide receivers, I haven't seen Chris Moore do much. Quincy Adebojo was a great story earlier in camp, but hasn't really distinguished himself the last couple weeks, and I'm not so sure about his roster chances. I haven't loved what I've seen from the tight ends. I think Boyle will be solid, but a lot of question marks. Max Williams didn't play on Saturday night when he had finally shown something in the second preseason game. Not really sure what the deal is there. We'll try to get some clarity in the next couple of days, but there's just not a whole lot to like about this offense right now, and that's saying a lot compared to a lot of the offenses that we've seen here, really for most of the existence of the franchise.
Yeah, until we go to Cincinnati and see them move the ball, we're going to pretty much think that they are going to struggle to move the ball.
Yeah, it comes down to this. I think this defense has a chance to be great. I think this defense has a chance to be one of the best in the NFL this year. That said, I think this offense could be terrible if certain things don't manifest and certain things don't happen that need to happen. Doesn't mean they will be terrible, but there's not a whole lot to look at on the offensive side of the ball over these 3 games, and you say, I really like what I see there. Taquan Mizzell, I give him some credit. He did a nice job filling in for Danny Woodhead. The thing that hurts him is also the thing that's intriguing about him, in that he has a very similar skill set to Danny Woodhead and does some nice things as a receiver out of the backfield. Does that mean he makes the roster? I'm not sure, but certainly someone that you would think you'd like to keep around on the practice squad at the very least. But there's just not a whole lot to write home about, and I get it. So much of it has been about the fact that Flacco hasn't been on the field, and Ronnie Stanley hasn't been on the field the last 2 games, and Marshall Yanda didn't play the first 2 games, although that's not a concern because he's ready to go. They're just keeping him out. But you got some new parts on this offensive line. They haven't really been able to build that cohesiveness. There's questions about tight end. Brashad Perriman's missed just about all of training camp for the 3rd straight season. So, as far as him having a chance to make some strides and progress, that's something you worry about, although he was working out on the field before Saturday's game and looked pretty good, running at about 3/4 speed. So, that leads you to believe, puts him in the running to be ready for the opener, you would think, assuming he continues to progress. But there's just not a whole lot to love about this offense right now. And, you hope Ronnie Stanley's ready to go. Certainly that becomes an even bigger concern if he's not, because I don't love this offensive line, even if it's fully healthy necessarily. Certainly don't love it if he's not out there. And as much as I trust Joe Flacco, considering he's a 10th-year veteran and he's going to be as ready as he's capable of being, you're talking about a guy who at most is going to get a handful of practices on the field. And based on the way John Harbaugh talked after the game, I'm not so sure we're not going to see him until next week, meaning he's going to have 3 or 4 practices. I don't care how great you are. Tom Brady practices. Tom Brady plays a little bit in the preseason. The absolute best play a little bit. So, to think that Flacco's just going to show up and there aren't going to be some dents in the armor and there aren't going to be some growing pains and there's not going to be some issues with him and Jeremy Maclin not being on the same page because they've had all but 2 minicamp practices of on-field time together, that's a lot to be concerned about there. So as much as I want to be completely optimistic about the defense, because I think even with their couple question marks, inside linebacker, maybe the nickel, even with those taken into account, I really like what I see from this defense, but it's kind of the polar opposite of this offense. There's not much that I really like about what I've seen from this offense. And at the very least, I was hoping to see them get the running game going. If that's the one thing that you could try to jumpstart a little bit, knowing that, Flacco wasn't going to be out there and you weren't going to get a great read on your passing game. Well, they averaged 2.6 yards per carry in the first half. So, this team is going. We've talked about the running game at length. over and over and over the last few years, and
it's almost replaced the secondary conversation, right?
Oh, yeah, no doubt. I mean, and the running game's been a topic of conversation for a few years, but more so than ever, because you have a quarterback who's not going to get any live preseason reps, you have to have a running game that's going to be functional and going to take some pressure off. And, I mean, if you go into Cincinnati and you're running against a brick wall and not able to run the football, and Joe Flacco's going to have to try to throw it 45 times, I don't think they can win that way. I don't think they're going to be able to win that way, especially with him not having...
Yeah, no matter how good the defense plays, right?
I mean, you have to... Everyone wants to talk about 2000, and that's great, even though I'll remind everyone this defense, as impressive as it is, they don't have a 25-year-old Ray Lewis running around, so let's pump the brakes a little bit in that regard. But even if you're going to try to use that formula, you've got to be able to have a running game that can keep you on schedule, keep you in third and manageable, move the ball, keep the field position game under control, and then you can really unleash that defense. But if it's more a case of you're not moving the ball and you're going 3 and out and you're squandering good field position, and even when you get it on a short field, you're only getting 3 points, that's not good. On Saturday night, they had 3 drives where they in the first half alone, where they started at the 50 or in Buffalo territory. And in those 3 drives, they netted 3 points. I mean, that's not good. And I get it. It's Ryan Mallett. I get it. You didn't have Stanley, and Yonda only played really a cameo, and that's it. But at some point in time, the light switch has to go on. The light bulbs has to go on. And I don't know how ready this offense is going to be. And for a team that's already had its issues winning games on the road the last few years, really since Super Bowl 47. That's kind of a scary proposition going into Cincinnati Week 1 with that offense not looking very well prepared at this point. That said, Sunday Night's News, Adam Schefter reports Vontaze Burfict facing a potential 5-game suspension. Even if that gets reduced, you would think he's not going to be in play for Week 1. So that kind of levels the playing field. Adam Jones already suspended for the Bengals, so that hurts their secondary. So, maybe the stars aligning for the Ravens a little bit there, but considering they haven't won in Cincinnati since 2011, you look at this one on paper and hard to love what you're seeing right now from the offense, thinking they're going to go into Cincinnati and play well enough to win a football game.
Not just seeing these injuries this time of the year, but seeing teams go out and all of these flags and all of these problems and all of these leaky boats and stuff. Boy, the Bills stunk. The Dolphins stunk. The Redskins stunk, and I watched them again on Sunday, and they stunk again. I see a lot of bad football being played, not just teams that look like they're going to be bad, teams that looked inept, not just holding calls and penalties, but like lack of the ability to function properly.
Yeah, and it's so hard to say. I mean, I can tell you any number of teams that I thought looked really bad in a preseason, including some years with the Ravens even, where in past years where they're in the preseason they didn't look so great, and then all of a sudden they kick off for real, and they're a good team. And on the flip side, you see a team that looks really good in the preseason, and it doesn't show up. I think the best example is the 2008 Lions, who went 0-16. They went 4-0 in the preseason. But you're right. Those 3 teams specifically, can't say I was impressed. Really can't. So I don't think Buffalo is going to be very good this year. I think the moves that they've made in the preseason, with some of the trades they've made, trading away Darby, trading away Sammy Watkins, indicative of a team that is in rebuilding mode, or at least reloading kind of a mode. Have Washington. They lost a heck of a lot on the offensive side of the ball with some of those receivers, and I think the Kirk Cousins situation is certainly something worth watching as far as how that goes and how they've mishandled that. And I think he's a pretty good quarterback, but he doesn't have near the weapons this year that he's had over the last couple of years. So how does that impact him? As much as we've talked about that narrative with Joe Flacco the last few years. So those teams, and Miami. A lot of it is going to come down to how quickly does it jive with Cutler. I think he looked better. I had a chance to catch him a little bit in this most recent preseason game. Barely played against the Ravens. Can he be? Can Adam Gase find that magic with him? If they can, then that's a team that'll probably be in the wild card hunt in the AFC. If not, that team probably won't be very good. So it's definitely, and this goes back to what we were talking about at the beginning of the conversation. You're always trying to find that balance with keeping your players healthy, trying to keep them out of harm's way, but at the same time, you can't just show up week one and just roll the ball out there and think that you're going to play well.
Now, if Flacco throws 4 touchdown passes and we win 34-16 in Cincinnati, I'm going to go back and rewind this on you. You can't just go out there and roll. I don't think that's going to happen, but it could. It could.
Well, I mean, it could, but then at the same time, I would ask any coach, why do you play anyone?
Why do you practice?
Right. I mean, and this goes back to Harbaugh at the end of his press conference on Saturday night, kind of bristling at a question from a reporter about, was Flacco going to practice this week? And, then made a comment of saying, do you really care when he's going to practice? Which I think was kind of silly to say. I mean, the entire city wants to know when Joe Flacco is going to start practicing because coaches tell us how important practice is and you need to prepare.
And they also tell us how important the quarterback is.
Yeah. So, I mean, if he goes out there and plays great, then great. Maybe the Ravens will go 13-3 and win a division and get a first-round bye. And, who knows, with New England losing Julian Edelman, maybe it's going to be a sign of their fortunes changing a little bit. But, from everything we know, from everything we've seen of Joe Flacco in the past, including him not playing very well in Cincinnati in the past, the fact that he potentially is not going to be on the field until the week of the game, I'm not liking that. I'm not feeling that. Sorry. As much as I'm feeling this defense, I can't buy that one as far as feeling too good about that. But if you have a great defense, maybe what we saw on Saturday night is how they're going to have to get by at least for the first few weeks of the season. They might have to win some 13-9, 13-10 kind of games.
It also speaks volumes to where they are with Ryan Mallett at this point, that they would throw Flacco in there 2 days after coming back from practice and say, you still give us a better chance to win with a half-broken back and no practice than the dude that's been out here running around the last 6 weeks.
Yeah, but I will say, I think part of that's part of the plan, though. I mean, I agree with that. I mean, if they were in the middle of the season right now, I'm guessing Joe would have been back a few weeks ago.
Well, they've all been very, very, very confident that he will be under center and a healthy version of him in Cincinnati 2 weeks from now. So everyone I've looked at in the eye believes that to be true. So therefore, I'll report it as true, right? I mean, that's their confidence level right now that he's playing.
Well, I think he's playing, but how well he's going to play, what the level of rust is going to be. I think another factor. What's the plan for? I know it's not like a pitcher in baseball. But you're talking about a guy who presumably has not thrown in weeks. Maybe he has started throwing on his own privately inside the field house in Owings Mills for a couple weeks now. But, how does that work? I would think there's some kind of throwing progression, maybe not as dramatic or pronounced as a pitcher in baseball, but at the same time, it's not a natural human motion for a guy to be chucking the ball 60 yards downfield. So, is there a progression there? Is there something that they have to watch there where they want to make sure there's not an overuse injury with the shoulder or compromise the back? I mean, these are all very fair questions. I know John Harbaugh doesn't want to answer them, but these are things that fans want to know right now. So, until we see him back out there and until we have any idea how he looks, and quite honestly, the viewing portion of practices that are open to the media, we're probably not going to see a whole lot because that's generally special teams and a time where Joe's not doing a whole lot, except maybe throwing some light stress kind of throws at that point in practice. So it's going to remain a mystery. And again, even putting the Flacco factor aside, which is the biggest story, which is the biggest concern until we see him, despite their confidence, you still look at this offensive line, you look at the lack of the running game. I think tight end is very much a question mark. There's
the whole thing's a question mark. I mean,
there
really
are a lot of boxes that need to be checked off for me to really feel good enough about this offense, even being average. And I think if this offense can be average, to me, that's a good chance that this is a playoff team then, because I think this defense can be that special. But this offense wasn't average last year.
Well, define average, too. You can be average and never turn the ball over. That's a win. You can be above average and turn the ball over a lot, and stink. I mean, if they're just average and don't turn the ball over, that works.
Yeah. I mean, they need to, and believe me, when I say average, I mean that a team that can take care of the football, can move the ball a little bit, can score some points. Not a team that can't, is beating its head against the wall and going 3 and out and committing 2 turnovers a game and putting your defense on a short field. And committing a lot of penalties, which, by the way, they had a lot of penalties in the first half on Saturday night, and that was something that Harbaugh lamented and certainly wasn't something you like to see. A lot of those on the offensive line, which is something you really don't want to see. But, if they can find that average middle-of-the-pack territory, it's kind of like the Orioles starting pitching. It's almost exactly like that. The Ravens' defense, their special teams, Justin Tucker, all of that you feel really good about right now, as long as Justin Tucker's not trying to make any more tackles, which, my goodness, someone needs to get that through his head. I mean, that was way too close for comfort, seeing him almost concussed on Saturday night after picking up a fumble the week before. I mean, dude, it's the preseason. Chill a little bit. But, just like we talked about with the Orioles starting pitching, can you find that middle-of-the-pack territory? Can this offense be middle-of-the-pack? Can they be average? Can they be solid? I don't think there's a ceiling for them to be much better than that. But can they be in that territory? If they can, then I like this team's chances to win 10 games and make the playoffs. If not, then I think they're going to find themselves in a territory not far off from where they were last year, which is in it, competitive, but coming up on the short end in some too many close games because having an offense that holds them back, no matter how good that defense could end up being.
When your offense stinks, it's really frustrating, isn't it, as a fan?
It is. And you would think we're better equipped in this town than most to understand that, because
we had a long time.
We can remember seeing Eric Sire and Jim Harbaugh and Stoney Case and Scott Mitchell and Tony Banks and even Trent Dilfer, and go down the list, Kyle Bowler.
Did you get Scott Mitchell in there? You got him?
Yeah, anyone you want to name, throw in there.
Jeff Blake, you put him in there?
Yeah. I mean, Jeff Blake. But
Steve McNair, Chris Redmond.
They and the one thing that
Raleigh Richardson.
If Flacco's healthy, if Flacco's right physically, if he can, accelerate the learning curve and accelerate the building the rapport with Jeremy Maclin that hasn't been able to be done at this point. If he can get up to speed and those guys can get on the same page sooner rather than later, then you do feel better about this offense, unlike those past offenses, because you do have a quarterback that, regardless where he ranks, certainly is capable of playing at a high level, at least for stretches of time. There's a lot of questions. Like I said, I feel great about this defense. I don't feel good whatsoever about this offense right now, and until we see Ronnie Stanley back, and until we see Joe Flacco officially back and practicing, I think that skepticism is more than fair at this point.
He is Luke Jones. He is Baltimore Luke. He will be on the backfields in Owings Mills for a short week. Ravens in New Orleans. There's going to be cuts. There's going to be things going on. If you're on the WNST text service, anything of significance you'll get there. Obviously out on our Twitter, our Facebook, our Instagram, Snapchat, LinkedIn, all that stuff. You will get the breaking news. You'll get it all brought to you by Coons Ford at Security Boulevard. And, of course, Dennis Kolatzis will be here on Thursday getting you ready for final fake football as well as real football next week. It is the SSV on WNST, heard from 3 until 5 here on Thursdays. Nasty at WNST.net finds me. Facebook, Twitter, Snapchat, Instagram, LinkedIn, anywhere you are, we are WNST.net, AM 1570 and WNST Towson, Baltimore, and we never stop talking Baltimore sports.